This is IBM Museum. I wanted to talk about a couple of Christmas Day discoveries that I made. I was digging around in the basement storage area. One of the first things that I came across was this sealed um, box. This is all cellophaned up and everything of IBM's TopView program. And it's likely I won't unbox this at all. I'll just clean it up a little bit, clean up the outside cellophane. There's probably versions of this that exist on the internet in archive form. But I'll go through and I'll read a little bit of the package just to kind of give an indication of what it is. And as we can see on the cover here, and this is the personal computer software in the productivity family, and it shows some graphical screens on the cover here, just some cartoonized, I guess, or different views. It says a versatile, easy to use system that extends the productivity of your IBM personal computer, saves you time by letting you run and view more than one program at a time. And that was letting you run and view more than one program at a time, which is that was a thing back in the day too. People wanted to move to where we are now. Switch quickly from program to program and exchange data among different programs. So this is what they had back in the day. And of course, it's in the classic IBM binder form that if the cellophane were removed, that you pull out the TopView program. Over here on this right-hand side is the license agreement. And, I'm not going to go through by any means to read that. And, but probably pretty standard license agreement at the time. I will read the column on the requirements, system requirements, software requirements, what it includes. And software required DOS 2.00 for IBM PC and PC XT, DOS 2.10 for portable PC and 3270 PC. And I do have some of those units too as well. Couple PCs, couple PC XTs. We can have a chance to run this later on. I'll find the copies that exist online to run. If I don't find anything, I would expect to find something online, but I'll archive it myself if I have to, just to show what it is. And I can't remember if I've seen. I don't think I have any unwrapped copies of this. So I don't remember if I've seen this in action before. Control program 1.20 for the 3270 PC. That's another system I have. Interesting system in itself. DOS 3.00 or 3.10 for personal computer AT. And that personal computer AT was new at the time. That was the top, one of the top systems that existed at the time of this TopView. And software included 2 diskettes, 1 program, 1 interactive tutorial. And I would expect that those would be on the 5 1/4 diskettes. And with a sealed package, and this has been stored away, hopefully not very close to any magnetic things that would go through and affect the diskettes, but I would expect those to be 5 1/4 diskettes. System requirements: IBM 80-column display or equivalent. IBM PC, PC XT, PC or portable PC, or personal computer AT. 256 kilobytes of memory minimum. 512 KB of memory recommended. Or IBM 3270 PC models 4 and 6 have these requirements of 448 kilobyte of memory minimum, 640 KB of memory recommended. 640 KB of memory. That gives you a clear indication of the time frame as well. 2 double-sided double-density diskette drives, or 1 double-sided double-density diskette drive and a fixed disk. So either you had a dual floppy system without a hard drive on it, or 2 diskette drives for having the diskettes in there, I guess, at the same time, or the software that you need to work on in OneDrive and the TopView interface in another diskette for the TopView interface in another one. Mouse pointing device, optional. And parallel printer is optional. Limited warranty for 90 days. For IBM service information, see program specifications inside. Copyright IBM Corporation 1984. All rights reserved. International Business Machines Corporation. P.O. Box 1328-S in Boca Raton, Florida. 33432. And I don't think the Boca plant is still in operation at all. Printed in the United States of America. And it is apparently some feature number. The number they have on here is 6024131. That's probably a reference number. And that's a lot of the style of the early FRU sequence of 7 digits. With that third digit, in this case, being a number instead of a letter, as we see with the later FRUs. So that's the IBM TopView user interface. Be interested in the comments to see if anyone has experience with the TopView interface. So the other find was, and I had reacted over the years to go through and to get the second edition, because this is a reference that I use. It's the Undocumented PC. Now, on my second edition, I don't know how I sourced it from, but it actually got an autograph of the author in this case. Oh, and you even get to see, this is maybe helpful for debugging. I don't know at what point. I've had this this book here for probably about a year and such. I don't know the circumstances I had, but I've got a squashed bug in there. Maybe that's a bit of symbolism for you. But I went through and when I couldn't locate my first edition book, I went through and got this. I don't know what I'd have to look through what the second edition. It's a little bit different printing in some of the ways that they used it, actually including icons in the bar for some of the things. And of course, you'll see that not much has really been marked up. It's despite the bug, it's still starting to get a little bit dog-eared, but from going through it. But still looks in pretty good condition. It's got some quotes and from the first edition, some people that are going through and recommending, and I suppose the thing to do here, and this is even listed for, I didn't pay this much, $49.95 in the U.S., $69 in Canada, with the kind of the difference in dollar amounts. And let me go through and also provide the ISBN for those that are interested as well. I know that's and this is copyright 1997, and it's Frank van Gilluwe. Gilluwe. I'm not sure of the pronunciation. That if Frank's out there, thanks for the autograph in the book, and I'm sorry I hacked up your name if I pronounced it wrong. But it's ISBN 0-201-479-50-8. I'll repeat that again since I hacked it up too. 0-201-479-50-8. And I'll also put that in the details on the video. Okay. And I mean, that's the second edition. As I said, the reason I got that was to replace my first edition when I couldn't find it around. And this is, more dog-eared and dirty. Of course, I found it even interesting. I've got even Jolly Rancher wrappers here as placeholders in some cases. When I'd go through, I've got a post-it note there, and the slightly bigger post-it pages for that. When I go through and would have an area to mark, and that's got a number, so I don't want to, and I don't know really what the indication there why I would have had it posted other than just marking it. I just took whatever is at hand with those Jolly Rancher. And I've, of course, brought out the diskette. I made good use of the diskette before. He's got all kinds of helpful programs. But in here, I do have it. There are some cases where I've got... In fact, I think on here I've got the post-it notes, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But I've got it marked up on corrections I've even made to the to this when I went through and empirically tested things and found things where I needed to add a little bit more of a comment in some cases. Oh, even here. Cache control, and I put out, he's got it marked as PS1, but I've got it marked out here as the MUL 90 and 95 as well. And even some of the things that they do, in this case, the author had it listed as unknown cache subfunction, but I've got it documented for, hey, this disables the L2 cache, this enables the L2 cache for these subfunctions. And then even he's got them inverted here in the book that I've put pointy arrows around. What did I see just a moment ago that I was... Okay. And there I've documented a little bit more. Disables both caches on the MUL 90 and 95, or enables both caches on the MUL 90 and 95. And I'm speaking of the L1 cache, which is on the CPU, that the CPU is able to turn off and on, and also the L2 cache, which is outside the processor in this case, the CPU. But excellent reference book. There's a Jolly Rancher place mark for something. And I went through and I've got just all kinds of notes in here. Exit standby mode for the floppy diskette controller chip. And I've wrote that all controllers return this value. But he's got code samples in here. Like I say, this is the excellent thing for an excellent reference book. System and equipment detection in this chapter. Going through and telling detecting what CPU is installed. Very helpful book. Great reference, whether it's the first edition or second edition. Let me give you the ISBN of the first edition here. And that is 0-201-62277-7. And this is copyright in 1994. So there's a little bit of about 3 years worth of difference between the first and second edition. Strongly recommended books. Of course, I have others. Now, I'm not a part, of course, I'm not big enough name yet to be in the DOS, any part of the DOSember area, but they also had Undocumented DOS. This is the treatise, the Andrew Schulman programming series. Very good reference books that were associated with that as well. And also Undocumented Windows. I mean, they went through quite a bit of material that they have in these books. So yes, these are recommended. And the one thing I was really happy to find with this first edition was I printed out 3 pages of code. And recently I've talked about the writing up the ESDILEVL program, the same as the SCSI level I did years ago. Just upgrading what IBM had out there. They'd released a program and I went through and I want to expand it further. But this is typically and we'll get to this also in a moment on the system, because it went through. I was surprised. I remember a little bit of writing this code, but it's a real typical style that I did at that time, and that I used what's more DOS than DOS debug? I would write what's called a script, assembly language, and pipe it through debug, and we'll do that in a moment. And I would go through and figure out all the, a lot of time I would just have placeholders in the program. I'd go through writing the code, and then I'd go through later on, and as I saw the output of the debug compilation or assembly of this code, I would go through and fill in the correct values for locations. And this is, just standard assembly language that has jumps, and all I'm doing is I'm jumping to a particular or referencing a particular address within the program, and going through and moving values between the registers as I go through and do this. But I was very glad to find this code, because so I don't have to start fresh, basically, in going through and starting to write code. And there's things that I need to add later on to turn off interrupts at the start of the program, and just to go through to make sure that the code runs good. And of course, it's always running this code to be run from DOS. It's just a COM utility, small little program. And you get down here in the area where I have the ESDI microcontroller version, and I've got the buffer area basically for the values that I've grabbed from the system and plugging those in. And as we'll see in a moment, I did run through and type in this code, but I went through, I did get out, I had the ESDI controllers kind of handy. Again, and this is what runs these ESDI hard drives, these old hard drives. So you'll get to hear this one start up in a moment. And the microcode being here, and different versions that I'm going through and figuring out what, just a cross-reference of the IBM FRU on the EEPROM chip and what version that meant between the, here even two different variations of the same adapter. And I was believing that this one is the later adapter that I have in my right hand. But ESDI hard disk attachment. And these having different FRUs on them, different EEPROM versions, and going through and figuring all that out. Having just a piece of software in my ESDILEVL that would make it so you don't even have to open the system up. You can run software on it to determine the version. I mean, 3 different versions there of the... I was even thinking I could play a game later on. I mean, the writing is near obliterated on that. I can't make out anything. But to run it through once I have software, even though now I know what version I have on here. But that would be for those circumstances that you don't even... a good blind test, that you don't know what version's on here. And this is under one of the later chips. I did pull the socket, and it's from Phoenix Software, which wrote a lot of the system BIOSes back in the day for various companies. And it looks like that Phoenix was in charge of the update for the ESDI hard drive attachment. I'll link in there of a page to all these references for these microcode versions, and have what versions I found so far, and those are just basically bug fixes. This controller, as it went through the product life cycle, IBM figured out that it, had particular bugs or areas that they need to correct that impacted certain things, or sometimes were only encountered errors from like OS2 or other things. But I pulled out the ESDI controllers when I had this, found this code, just to put in on the system and see if I could get the code that I wrote all those years ago working. And this is a MUL 60, and 286 CPU, no numeric coprocessor on this. It's got the ESDI controller. I've gone through and I've put a new battery in the ESDI drive. I had to go through and just gain it configured now with the new battery of going through, and I didn't have diskette drives that worked, and so I just did my little diskette drive that I knew would work, plug it into the system to get the system configured with that reference diskette that I have hanging out here. So let's get the system powered up, just so you can hear the glorious noise that these old hard drives make. Okay, I've gone through and I've rearranged some views here. Hopefully there won't be I'll just adjust things from there to go through, get it powered on. This system just has a megabyte of memory in this case. And I've got the keyboard in front of me. I'm seeing it just right as you guys are for the screen here. Okay. So I run a headset here, you know, the microphone just to cut down on that ambient noise. I don't know how much it can be heard of just the absolute racket of this drive, but let me take the microphone close. And I mean, I give you the full experience here, but I found this a little bit interesting too. When I had no idea what was on the system, I just went through to fire it up exactly as you see here, and it actually has what is the DOS shell program, and this is PC DOS. I don't know if you saw when it started up. It's the DOS version from IBM being PC DOS, not MS DOS, and that was version 4 is just about the time when IBM and Microsoft are doing the split. The OS2 pairing between them had really just kind of fallen apart. They had different goals, and the MS-DOS 4 on the Microsoft side was really known for a lot of bugs on its release. I think Microsoft went through and had a lot of test elements out there that went through and tried to make it as the release as easy as possible, but it was known for Microsoft quickly following it up with 4.01 and just one of those things, an early time maybe of a hated operating system like Vista or ME, Windows ME, of where people that experienced it years later could say, and there was even people that went back to the DOS 3.3 being the relative standard that when the IBM PS2s came out, that was the version that they shipped with, and was endearing more to people to run that 3.3 version a lot of time. And then Microsoft recovered a little bit with version 5. It was a little bit better received. Now, in this one, I didn't... and, of course, PC-DOS 4 really doesn't have a good... it might have the Edlin line editor, and I mean, there's people that prefer that. I'm not familiar enough with the key sequences to know. But I wanted to briefly go over the shell because, I mean, being December too, I mean, there's nothing more DOS than the DOS shell of the day. And this nice mouse pointer on the screen and things that, you could do kind of that graphical interface of this being the first time that it really, from IBM or Microsoft, really of that graphical environment coming out, or people getting used to having a graphical environment, having the mouse, disregarding the third, the later attempts like the TopView program that I showed earlier to give a user interface to it as well. And that was the DOS shell was just a user interface that you ran on top of DOS. I wanted to go through, we'll get to the command prompt in a moment, but I mean, for the file system, going through. And as you see, I've got the ESDILEVL stuff I've already tried earlier. We'll get to that in just a moment. I'll go through and recompile. And that process, I mean, it doesn't check to see if you've got a file, that name already on the disk, or number them in any particular way. It just overwrites what you have. And I just wanted to do a little bit of prep and in that program earlier. So, but this is the basically a file manager area of DOS Shell. Let's go back to the and the one thing I wanted to show, and I don't think I'll really necessarily go through anything more of the but here are some functions that you could do. And of course, the set time and date, I wanted to try that out. And can I move that window around somehow? Or is it just fixed? Because I really wanted to show, maybe the other way is just to get me repositioned here for just a short time. I mainly came down from the I didn't want to have it in that upper corner, just to show that in the upper left hand corner it does have the date there, and it's expressed as a 2-digit number, and then that straight away is the way I set it from the reference diskette with the 4-digit number correctly in this case. And then also having the time, the current time in the upper right-hand corner is the reason I didn't want to initially move myself up to that corner to kind of conceal that portion. But it's, as you know, the parameters, enter new date. And so going through 26, and if I do 20 and then enter, okay, and it I guess it took that. I was seeing even earlier that it was protesting that okay, so let's let the screen thing get out of the way, because apparently this just calls into DOS, but it flags as an invalid date, with that being now that we're in the year 2020, and so it says, hey, it can't be 1920. But I did find, even though, so it looks like DOS Shell is not necessarily Y2K compatible necessarily, but when I hit enter it as a 4-digit sequence here, and I just have to see from the DOS Shell if I put that in as a see, when I go try and type in that third and fourth numbers to the year, it goes through, and of course it won't take it as 20, it will kick it back. So we're just going to go through and we're going to escape out there. So I want to go through, we're going to just go to I mean, we can, so there's the exit shell. And I mean, we could have just gone to a DOS prompt as well, but I'm going to go through and change directory to the root directory where I put everything in, and probably will show up just fine there. So the one thing the 3 pages I found, that I have that as that ESDILEVL.scr. And I mean, Windows, of course, thinks that that's a screensaver program. And in Windows, when screensavers were big, and around the time of Windows 3.0 and 3.1, Windows for Workgroups 3.11, having that SCR file name extension, basically it was just you had an executable program that displayed information, and you changed the file extension to be SCR instead of an exe file. That's how people came up with screensavers. But so for the debug script file, and I'll run through it first. How I do is I do DOS debug, and let's start up debug. I mean, you can use it. It just gives you the dash prompt. You can go through. You can display particular file areas. This is the BIOS data area where it shows the COM ports that are set up on the system. As you can see in those first two columns, and it's inverted 03 F8 for the first COM port. If you had a second COM port, it'd be in the next two positions in that inverted sequence. Those are the IO addresses of those devices. And then if you go over 8 blocks to the dash, and that's the other half of that is you're looking over that addressing, but then it has the first parallel port that's on the system. In this case, 03 BC, and that was from the day where the monochrome display adapter had that first parallel port at that address, and IBM did that sequence when they came out with the PS2s later on, and that can actually confuse some programs, disk transfer programs and stuff like that as well, just being on that kind of a standard address that faded away. Typically later on, 0378 was the first parallel printer address on a system. And we're back to the debug prompt again. As I say, you can dump other areas, and we're referencing segmented areas, and debug is hexadecimal as a default. Of course, I know hexadecimal by it's very native to me and all the time I've worked with code. In fact, I'm going to go through and I'll actually pull. At this point, it's probably good enough to where we can go through. We're just looking at some of that BIOS code, and actually there should be with the PS2, but you can see that copyright IBM Corporation, how it's doubled, or actually, yeah, effectively doubled. I mean, the Model 60 even has, if I'd left that window up, even has 4 EEPROMs in there to comprise those segments, 2 for the F segment that we're looking at, also 2 for the E segment, because PS2s went through and they introduced your ABIOS and other areas. So there's the E segment as well, effectively using having twice as much of a BIOS ROM area as other systems, with the adding the ABIOS and things like that on the system. And whenever you're in debug, Q is quit, gets you back out to the DOS prompt. But so when I was doing my debug scripts, this is a way where you write up the script file. In fact, let's go through. And since we're in DOSember still, and DOS, of course, is not case sensitive in this case. And we're going to use nothing more DOS than using what's considered the pipe commands. the more. When you had more than one screen full of information, of going through and being able to see a screen full at a time, pressing the space bar, enter, pressing the key to get more displayed. But going through in the script file, go through and I name the program, and I assemble it as common programs are from that hex 100 address as it's loaded in memory. That's just how the operating system works with the COM format. And then all the pushes and pops and moves and interrupts and references to memory segments I have in there. This being all the effective code writing to that sequence. Be going through and moving registers like the AL to a particular space in a memory buffer where I had, and comparing a value that's held in a register, the AL register, and if it's jumping, if it's not equal J&E to a particular address in the program, and just going through. And like I say, even with the buffers that I had at the end of the program for display strings that would have, or areas as I went through and compiled that information, and then writing, figuring out the length of that code and writing that code, having debug compile it for me, and I doing that through this another piping command of saying run the debug program, but you're running it from the script file, running all the command sequence I had, all that code I had written up, of piping that into by that that greater than symbol, or kind of showing the direction of flow, I guess is the way, that ESDILEVL script going into debug by the arrow points of using the greater than and less than, and we'll get to the other value. But this is going through and just, we just had debug go through and assemble all that code, and so the ESDILEVL COM should have the current, close to the current time in it now of when it was done. And then the other aspect that I would do a lot of time with these script files is I'd go through and, besides piping in information, I would also to get output to a file rather than on the screen, so I could look over that file later on and learn some things. And I went through and I kind of hastily typed in the code that I had, even with the corrections, all the references I had. And when I ran it, I found it just goes through and it basically locks up the system. Just sits there with at the C prompt. There's nothing displayed from the program at all. But so I went through later on, and I took myself basically at face value, and it looked like some early code because just the placeholders I had were very simplistic. And so this way I could go through that text that I had debug due to that file rather than on the screen to examine that. And it going through, everything, there's not any errors that during that assembly process that are occurring. But I got looking at this, and even it's a lot more visible down towards the end. Like I have the MoveDX, 0198 as a reference of what memory address. There's also above that the about one of the jump below or equal to the 018A. And when I look at the code over on the left-hand side, the what's after the colon, that's where the address of that instruction is, and I can see that it's offset. I've got something still wrong because for the location 018A, that's not start of any particular code. It looks like I'm a byte or two off, and so I'm actually going to go through. I'm not going to be as tedious to go through and revise the code and have you guys wait and do a follow-up, but I'll probably do a later video once I go through and I analyze this a little bit more and get my instructions a little bit better to where those references actually are, what adjustments I should have made. And as I go through, of course, I'm going to go through and add more code in there, as I say, to turn off interrupts during the time that the program executes, just to avoid all those, if the system is having something else occur, to where I don't crash the system otherwise with good code, just that the system is engaged in other processes as well. And I don't have any checking in this at all. I mean, at the top of the program, I would normally go through and do measure of determining I'm even running on the microchannel systems for one. There's calls, and I can give links to how that's done, and also checking to see if I have an ESDI controller in that system as well, because I don't want to be running code. I just want to have it return an error saying, hey, this is not the correct system, or you don't have an ESDI controller in your system, to avoid those circumstances where I'm writing code for, I'm not targeting the right thing. I only want that code to run when I actually have that correct adapter in there. And these adapters, I mean, they're not going to be much anything in service anymore. Hobbyists are going to be the ones that have them. We are encountering some time now that we're sending around a few of these, a board or two of these to other members of the hobby on the Facebook group, but it's not these systems after 30 years are not going to be much in service these days. And of course, we saw that with the 2-digit year of the date code. But that's what I plan for later on, to go through and to write this up. I even have to check references on there of it's writing so much of the code, and got to make sure I'm getting all that code at the end of the program, that it comes up the right place. And again, that's all hexadecimal. I mean, it's handy to learn for a programmer. I'm so well used to it now of the translation between binary and decimal and hexadecimal. I've been coding a long time in that regard. I like assembly language. I go down to the nitty gritty of just one step off that machine code. And interesting enough, I never got into the C language stuff or much of the high level languages otherwise, beyond went through the university for some of the programming, and also have a strong preference for for the basic programs. And that was the reason why I was making the basement excursion, is I'm looking around for my Visual Basic for DOS, and hopefully that exists somewhere online as well. Maybe I can just download it these days and be able to run it and pick up and have that environment where I can learn a little bit more of, quickly learn where my code fails and stuff like that in doing the same executable utilities and programs I did before. But this is kind of the quick and dirty way to do it with DOS debug. So that's my contribution with this, with DOSember almost all the way over, of going through and showing how I used to code back in the day, and kind of resuming that from using the DOS debug as a way to assemble those little utilities and everything else. And it's really, I also like the, in a sense, the tediousness of the assembly language, or just basically keeping track of all the little details and making sure, double checking and going through and with this. I mean, I've got the assembler programs, a higher level, from Microsoft and even from Borland, that I've used as well. And I mean, I can go through them as well. They just make it a little bit easier to go through when you write code and compile it and all that. But that's just a real quick view of the program I'm trying to work on. And hopefully with these adjustments of making the references correct from here, I'll get this particular program and likely have a video where I can show it running and giving those results that I need. But, you know, if you like this video, go ahead and click on that like button. And this is IBM Museum. That's all I have for now. Thank you.